I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
As details of the USAID scandal continue to emerge, Wikileaks has added fuel to the fire with a recent information drop on February 7th. This sometimes controversial nonprofit revealed a disturbing but verifiable link between the USAID slush fund and an organization that seeks to gain control of the international narrative by co-opting the mainstream media. Throughout history, the information sphere has been a coveted acquisition for ideological and political power players. It's said that if you control the narrative, you control the discourse. And if you control the discourse, you control the minds that direct the future. Enter Internews, a USAID-connected nonprofit that claims to champion independent media. In reality, Internews is a government-funded narrative control globalist information war machine of an insidious force. Internews boasts of training over 100,000 journalists in over 100 countries. Now that sounds noble, doesn't it? But the fact of the matter is this. Internews is an ipso facto globalist-aligned media cartel that manipulates narratives to facilitate and advance far-left ideologies while undermining populist and conservative movements and even the sovereignty of nations worldwide. Internews promotes a neo-Marxist progressive orthodoxy while pretending to uphold the credibility of a free press and journalistic integrity. At the same time, it silences dissent through censorship and the deliberate omission of critical information. The organization has indoctrinated over 38,000 media educators, reporters, and fact-checkers under the guise of combating misinformation, a term increasingly deployed to delegitimize viewpoints that deviate from the preferred and anointed left-wing narratives. In reality, their efforts constitute a targeted effort to advance select ideological perspectives while delegitimizing opposing viewpoints. Internews' funding source betray its true objectives, as reported by Wikileaks.
USAID has pushed nearly $500 million through a secretive U.S. government-financed NGO, Internews Network, or Interworks, which has worked with 4,291 media outlets, producing in 1 year 4,799 hours of broadcasts reaching up to 778 million people. Internews has also supported social media censorship initiatives. The operation claims offices in over 30 countries, including main offices in the US, London, Paris, and regional headquarters in Kiev, Bangkok, and Nairobi. It is headed up by Jeanne Bourgault, who pays herself $451,000 annually. Bourgault worked out of the US Embassy in Moscow during the early 1990s, where she was in charge of a $250 million budget, and other revolts and conflicts at critical times before formally rotating out of 6 years at USAID to Internews. Bourgault's Internews bio and those of its other key people and board members have been recently scrubbed from its website, but remain accessible at archive.org. Records show the board being co-chaired by Democrat Securocrat Richard J. Kessler and Simone Otis Cox, wife of NVIDIA billionaire Trench Cox, both major Democrat donors. In 2023, supported by Hillary Clinton, Bourgault launched a $10 million Internews fund at the Clinton Global Initiative. The Internews page showing a picture of Bourgault at the Clinton Global Initiative has also been deleted. Internews has at least 6 captive subsidiaries under unrelated names, including one based out of the Cayman Islands. Since 2008, when electronic records began, more than 95% of Internews' budget has been supplied by the U.S. government.
USAID's historical entanglement with regime change operations and its promotion of neo-Marxian New World Order social engineering policies, should alone raise suspicions about the kind of independent media that Internews claims to support. To add credence to the idea that Internews is nothing but an oligarchical neo-Marxian propaganda front serving the whims of the globalist class is the revelation of financial backing from George Soros's Open Society foundations. As reported by Amuse on X,
Internews has played a direct role in creating political instability and chaos in Venezuela, Kazakhstan, Myanmar, and Afghanistan, where clandestine organizations and USAID foreign policy interests have leveraged Internews to foster dissent, support opposition movements, and ultimately engineer instability. By flooding these regions with Internews-trained journalists and media networks, the organization has been instrumental in shaping narratives that align with U.S. geopolitical objectives, undermining sovereign governments in favor of pro-Western factions. Former high-ranking U.S. officials, including Victoria Nuland and Samantha Power, have been key figures in overseeing agencies that fund Internews, reinforcing its ties to globalist foreign policy objectives. Nuland, in particular, played a pivotal role in utilizing Internews to control Ukrainian media. Under her direction, Internews and USAID effectively took control of 9 out of 10 major media companies in Ukraine, ensuring that local reporting adhered to a strict pro-Western and anti-Russian agenda. These media outlets became entirely dependent on Internews and USAID funding, with their reporters trained and guided by Internews operatives. It is no coincidence that Internews-backed journalists were instrumental in organizing the Maidan protests and the broader color revolution that ultimately led to regime change in Ukraine.
A deeper look into Internews' role in narrative control uncovers a truly repugnant operation, where the organization cynically labels legitimate news outlets that challenge their neo-Marxian orthodoxy as peddlers of misinformation. Far from merely flagging content for review, Internews aggressively coerces advertisers to pull financial support from these outlets until they capitulate to its narrative or are effectively silenced. This financial blackmail is a blatant assault on free speech designed to systematically mute conservative, nationalist, and libertarian voices, ensuring they are deplatformed and silenced for good. One of the most egregious acts of manipulation by Internews is its zealous endorsement of the climate alarmist agenda. It actively suppresses any open debate on climate science and policy, enforcing a relentless campaign of climate hysteria. Skepticism towards draconian environmental policies is not just dismissed, but vilified as misinformation or disinformation. Through its so-called training programs, Internews brainwashes journalists to treat any form of dissent against climate alarmism as heresy, thereby discarding the fundamental journalistic tenets of objectivity, balance, and inquiry for pure advocacy under the guise of journalism. Internews doesn't train journalists. It breeds ideological drones who infiltrate the global mainstream media infrastructures. It functions more like a ministry of truth, dictating permissible discourse, who is allowed to speak, and what narratives the public is allowed to consume. This isn't an exercise in media freedom. It's an exercise in media vassalage by an elite oligarchy, a direct assault on free speech and constitutional representation, funded, ironically, by our tax dollars. Now do you see the urgent need to dismantle the deep state? Now do you understand the contemptible nature of those who protest against Donald Trump and Elon Musk's efforts to expose the systemic corruption? If you're not pissed off, you should be. When we return our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station, WGUL, AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida. And you won't hear any Internews here.
You're listening to Underground USA.
The foundation of our great nation lies in our unwavering commitment to freedom, and at its core is the principle of free speech. It's not just a right, but a duty to speak our minds, respectfully debate, and challenge ideas. Today, free speech is under attack by the forces of the deep state and the globalists. We must all do our part to protect free speech, for without it, we'd be lost in a sea of woke conformity and censorship. We have the right. Protect it.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
First things first. What did you think of the Super Bowl on Sunday?
I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it. It was on in the background, and the only thing that sparked my ears were some of the commercials and the fact that the crowd booed Taylor Swift.
Yeah, she did get booed. Yeah, and there wasn't a lot for her to smile about because her boyfriend Travis Kelce seldomly caught the ball at this point. They just fell apart.
I stopped watching. Well, I stopped watching the NFL after 1985 because I was from Chicago and I haven't seen a football team match that since. But, and that's bias, I get it. But as soon as the NFL started when it went woke, I just as with every other sports team or league that went woke, I can't support them. I don't want to support them. Quite honestly, and this sounds kind of jaded, but the football fans that I know tend to be people, they're the blue collar kind of country music listening people, and they haven't had an NFL halftime show represent the mainstream watcher for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. And it used to be the halftime show really was it was celebrated. It was the epitome. It was anticipated. I have to say I was not impressed at all with this halftime show. I didn't think that it was on that par at all.
No, and it's on par with what quote unquote popular music is today. It doesn't represent the population of America. That's why there is no more pop music out there like you knew it back in the 70s or the 80s or even some of the 90s. And those stations have evaporated. And most of the people who used to listen to that went over to country music, thus the giant bump in the popularity for country music because it has a melody.
Yeah, that's really true. I was thinking the other day too, Frank, just incidentally here, now that you mentioned that, back in the day, you would hear a lot of different music under the quote pop music label.
Absolutely.
You'd hear rock music or this pop rock, but then you'd also hear like Eddie Rabbitt, Drive My Life Away. It'd all be on the same station.
You'd hear a mix of folk, R&B. It was everything that constituted what rock and roll was, which was a giant big tent type of thing. Yeah. And that constituted popular top 40 music. Today, top 40 music with the demise of the record labels, and I'm not saying that's not a bad thing because the record labels they killed a lot of great talent out there by not giving them a fair shake. But all you have now on the top 40 is either bubblegum Taylor Swift or rap. And as much as there is a talent to producing decent and complex rap, and even some bubblegum music is appealing, a steady diet of that is going to make your kid 200 pounds because it's too sugar, or they want to go out and kill somebody. So being somebody who was a professional musician before I got into the fire service, and granted I was a jazz guy, but I did a lot of studio stuff too. The music business today is in a real big, bad way. And if it wasn't for country music, even in some of the more pop avenues that country music has gone into, which is good. I'm not a huge fan of that either, but we've got a lot more talent in the United States and around the world than is actually getting airplay. And I think that's why a lot of alternative stations that play alternative music and non-top 40 music. In Chicago, we've got WXRT, which is well known from coast to coast. That does that. They don't play this stuff. They play stuff that has a melody that's complex, that has meaning to it. I don't see that anymore today, and that was representative during the halftime show.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. Something else too about the Super Bowl right before we go to break, Frank, and that was they took away the end racism phrase in the end zones, and then replaced it with choose love. I'm of the mind, why do you need a phrase in the end zone to begin with?
You don't need a phrase in the end zone. Let the football players play football. And quite honestly, the very little bit that I did watch of the game, you might as well put flags on them and let it be flag football. I made a comment yesterday as I was passing past the television. I said, if the 85 Bears defense had to play today, they would have all been ejected from the game for playing too hard.
Mm-hmm.
Football's not supposed to be a non-contact sport. It's a contact sport. So all these rules that keep people from getting touched, it's ruined the game. And all this touchy-feely woke crap that has infiltrated it, it's killed the game. That's why I won't watch it.
Well, Frank, there's this issue going on in Minnesota right now. This, according to Breitbart, the Minnesota State High School League has published a statement saying it will not obey President Donald Trump's updated Title IX rules that forbid transgender athletes from playing in girls' sports. And Frank, what do you think about this? I mean, does this become a states' rights issue? What's going on here in terms if they're going to defy that? Because obviously President Trump is making these amendments or making these changes because he's trying to have women's sports be women's sports.
Yeah, my question for that authoritative body is, what do you have against women? Why are you catering to gender dysphoria accounts for, I believe it's like 0.1% of the population, true cases of gender dysphoria. So why are you putting 0.01% of your population in Minnesota above 50% or more? Because females make up 50% or more of the population in the United States today. Mm-hmm. So what is with that? This just reeks of a giant virtue signal, which is not educational at all, and it's certainly not equitable if they want this diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can say you don't want to do Title IX. This body comes out and says they don't want it. That's their prerogative. They have every right in the world to do it. The federal government may go and try and sue them to do it for violating equal protection laws, but I don't think they would win because of the 10th Amendment. So they can go ahead and say we're not going to do it all they want. But there are consequences to those actions. Mm-hmm. They don't get federal funding then. So all the federal funding that would go to education in Minnesota, and this is why I'm pretty sure the people on this authoritative body didn't think this through. Because if I'm the Secretary of Education in the state of Minnesota, I was burning a telephone line to them saying, "What are you doing?" Because the federal government can say, "Okay, you took the lead for the entire educational community in the state of Minnesota by saying you're not doing this. We're withholding federal funding. You're either all in or you're not in, one or the other. But if you're violating Title IX, then I don't have to give you federal tax dollars. So go raise the taxes in your district and see how the people there like paying more in taxes because you want a virtue signal for 0.01% of the population."
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Indeed. And, when just in the last segment, Frank, you were talking about how some of the rules in the NFL, have changed in terms of, how much contact really the players can have. Well, at the very least, though, those players are on parity with one another, generally speaking. They're 300 pounds and they're, there's this kind of stuff. And, but yes, they can do a lot of damage when they run full speed into each other. But in this particular situation, if you have transgender people coming into a women's sport, by definition, they already have a huge advantage, at least in terms of body mass and weight and what have you. And it's not fair, to have that kind of thing, and actually can end up hurting the women in that sport to begin with.
We've seen that in a few instances so far where serious life-altering damage has happened. My question is this. I mean, if we're going to do the trans athlete thing, and Tommy here wants to pretend that he's a woman and he demands that he wants to play lacrosse, okay, go right ahead, but you're playing against the guys.
Mm-hmm.
You want to identify as a woman and play lacrosse? That's great, but we're going to make it so that the male sport has to take that on, not the female sport. If you want to be a trendsetter and someone who breaks the rules and shatters that glass ceiling, okay, I'm all for you. But little Thelma here, who used to be little Tommy, you're going to play in men's sports because that's where your physical attributes belong. So go ahead and put your man bun on and go ahead and get out there. But you're not going to be playing with people whose bodies are physically different than yours. So have at it.
Right. Well, and Frank, what you're talking about is very practical, right?
Oh, yeah. God forbid government does anything practical.
Right. Yeah, but it seems to take into account the physical realities of our world, right? And it's really something, because we do live in a day and age now where even a Supreme Court justice cannot define what is a woman. And how in the heck can people say they want to protect women, which, is a good thing, but why, if they can't even define it, why should we listen to them about anything? Because this is beyond ridiculous at that point.
It's Capital City in the Hunger Games. Nothing makes sense. Everything is upside down. You have people like Justice Ketanji Brown, who wouldn't be there if it weren't for equal rights. Sotomayor wouldn't be there if it weren't for equal rights. And now they're throwing the entire female population under the bus because they're virtue signaling.
Yeah,
it's dumb. And like you said, they're not employing practical solutions to this. Do you think that if Leah, what was it? What was his real name? Leah Thompson, Lester? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Do you think if he still had to swim against men and he was still coming in 4th and 5th and 6th and not placing, because he changed his name to Leah, that he would still be playing this game? No, because it didn't give him an advantage. It didn't give him the step up that he took advantage of by misrepresenting his physical characteristics. So the practical solution, and I know solution is a dirty word in politics and in ideological corners. Okay, you want to be a girl, go ahead, wear a dress, but you're still playing on the boys' team.
Well, right, and people can, in a free country, they can, sort of say whatever they want. But what happens is then they're asking you and me and everybody else to accede to their statement, as if we completely agree with it. We have to act as though we agree with it entirely and pretend. And that to me is not a good thing for America.
That's the beauty of freedom, when you actually fight for it and say, I deserve it because I live in a free country. I don't have to recognize you for jack. I really don't. You can identify as a freaking doorknob if you want to. Good for you. You know, if you want to sit there and turn back and forth all day long and say I'm a doorknob, then okay, that guy thinks he's a doorknob. But I don't have to recognize you as a doorknob and go up and try to turn you to walk through you every time you're in my path. When we tolerate these things, and it's not, like I said, you could go ahead and identify like the doorknob. I don't care. Mm-hmm. But when society says, and you will call him a doorknob, that's when my middle finger goes up.
Right.
I don't have to, and I won't, and you can't make me. And if you take me to court on it, we'll end up in the Supreme Court on this. Right. Because why should you back down? Americans have never backed down from a challenge, and this lunacy about saying black must be white and you have to say that that's so, otherwise there's penalties. We don't have to put up with it, and we shouldn't.
No, agreed. And because again, you know, this is, as you said, you know, it's a free country, and
as long as you fight for it, Kyle. Right. If you're not willing to fight for it, then you lose it, and that's where we were the last 4 years. Are sitting people going, what? Okay, I guess you're a girl, Leah.
You know, Frank, we always we talk a lot about what's happening in the Middle East, and over the weekend, we saw another 3 hostages, Israeli hostages held by Hamas, released in exchange for, I think it was at least 180 Palestinian prisoners, which is, again, a horrible ratio. But again, we wouldn't even be in this position, number one, I think, if Donald Trump had been in office, but also if the Biden administration hadn't released the funds to eventually lead to October 7th. But nevertheless, Hamas seems to still be digging in, and we don't see any kind of end in sight, really, in the sense of the fact that, you know, and they've got the peace negotiations or what have you, the ceasefire, but they still are trying to show that they're very formidable. And I think it's a terrible message because they look like a military mob and certainly not somebody you can do business with.
No, I agree with you. I think Mr. Netanyahu was on the right path to say they must be eradicated, and with the capitulation to a ceasefire and removing troops from Gaza, which they've done in a couple areas, to allow this to go back to what's going to be a status quo. It might not be the Hamas of 2023. But it'll certainly be the Hamas of post-1967. You know, it's just going to start all over again. Terrorist groups, I've got zero love and sympathy for them. If they are expunged from the planet, good. If that's your idea of conflict resolution, where you have to go blow up innocent women and children, then Dante's got a special circle for you down in hell.
Yeah.
And this idea that Israel has been held back by the miscreants of the United Nations, which is a useless organization that should be disbanded immediately, if not just kicked out of the United States. How do you look at a people who get routinely attacked and say you're the aggressor?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's this. It's this like a mind manipulation technique. You keep saying it over and over again. It's the prevailing, quote, consensus, and then it justifies their bad actions later on against Israel.
And it doesn't make any sense for the UN to say Israel is illegitimate because by UN resolution, Israel exists. Now, they didn't need the UN resolution to exist. The Jewish people have been in the region that's Israel since before Christ.
Right.
But for the UN to come, it would be like the framers of the United States coming back and saying the United States is illegitimate. Well, you created it. What are you doing? So this idea that of the big tent inclusion United Nations, by virtue of just that issue alone, it's lost its legitimacy. And it really shouldn't be heeded anywhere in the world. It shouldn't have any say about anything. The original idea behind the UN was to have a place where countries could actually meet and talk out their differences so that we didn't have another world war. And there have been more skirmishes and more violence around the world since World War II than at any time in the League of Nations or the United Nations existence. Mm-hmm. So when has it actually done anything that's helped humanity? They deliver food aid to countries that are supposed to be in famine and then walk away, and the warlords of those regions take the food and use it as intellectual clubs over the people. If you don't do what we say, we don't feed you. You starve to death. That's not helping people. They've failed in every genocide that's ever happened during their tenure of existence. So what have they done? What has the UN done that's worth anything?
Good question. And a lot of people just get to double park because they're somehow affiliated with the UN. I guess that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a useless organization, and we need to take a very hard look at that because it's not equitable, and it's steel clubbing this idea of a global government, which is never going to work. I don't care what the people at the World Economic Forum say. I don't care what the people at The Hague say. I don't care what the people of the EU say. These conglomerates of we're going to lord over multiple countries, they're just totalitarians. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with sovereignty. It has nothing to do with freedom. It has everything to do with control and oppression. So anybody that believes that they've got a say over multiple countries, I don't sign on to. Indeed.
Well, talking about the Palestinians, of course, Hamas is there in Gaza, but Trump's idea, or at least this idea of doing something different in Gaza is actually a pretty good thing. It's a thought experiment, certainly, but definitely it would be better to do something new rather than just go back, like you're talking about, to the old ways. But Jordan, for example, now is chiming in on all this, the idea of bringing more Palestinians to Jordan, which I always thought was the homeland anyway for the Palestinians. But they're upset because they say it would destabilize the country.
Well, if we go back to ancient times, the Palestinians' origins are from Crete and the Aegean area. So we can go a little bit more north and a little bit more west if you want to say where do the Palestinians go, because there weren't any Palestinians, they were Philistines. That's where that word comes from. But Jordan, I wouldn't want to take them either. The last time Jordan or Egypt did something for the Palestinian people, and they took them in, they caused violent chaos within their countries. So why would you want to take them? Why would you want to? That's why the Arab world is not absorbing any refugees from Gaza. It's because the Palestinian people have an intrinsic problem with violence. Violence and disgruntledness. They're non-cooperative people who keep electing a terror organization as their leadership. So, you want the world to help you, then you're going to have to become a member of the world society. But if you're just going to walk around trying to figure out how to create the next bomb vest so you can go and blow up another a bus in Tel Aviv, then you have to be an enemy. You have to be an enemy. So I was disappointed that this war didn't come to a complete and utter surrender situation, because that's what the Israeli people deserve. Complete and utter surrender after what happened on October 7th. But, it's their choice to make. And if they decided to enter into a deal that they think is good for them, then I have to support them as an ally. Doesn't mean I have to agree with it 100%.
Well, the one thing that continues to concern me, Frank, is the propaganda that has, unfortunately, I think, made a lot of people have a very, very wrong perspective on what Hamas is, what's happening there, because you still have a lot of people, even in this country, who are like, but as you mentioned earlier, Israel's somehow the aggressor, Hamas is responding to that, therefore to find them a different place to live, the Palestinians, that is and redevelop Gaza, that's the height of imperialism and blah, blah, blah.
Well, you have to read their charter. You have to know what Hamas is. Hamas is a recognized, internationally recognized terrorist organization. It's not your down the street boys club that you could say, okay, let's get them a new clubhouse right over here. That's not what this is. These are people who are committed per their charter, this organization, to the annihilation of Israel so that it doesn't exist anymore. And now you've got a world community and idiots on college campuses that are saying, why don't we give them a homeland immediately next door to the people that they want to annihilate?
Right. Yeah.
Does that make it? That's why we don't have critical thinking skills in our mainstream society today, and education and the media to blame.
You're listening to Underground USA.
A free and independent media is the backbone of our great republic. So it's crucial to have media outlets that aren't influenced by big tech censorship or the leftist mainstream media complex. But that means supporting journalistic outlets that bring us the truth without spinning facts to push a narrative. For less than the cost of a cup of coffee once a month at Starbucks, you can support the free speech mission of undergroundusa.com, an independent, reader-supported, and sometimes irreverent podcast and publication that gives you the real story without the bias. Go to undergroundusa.com/UUSA. That's undergroundusa.com/UUSA to receive a 25% discount on an annual subscription, bringing every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox, circumventing the censors and fact checkers. Remember, knowledge is power, and staying informed is one of the best ways to protect our republic. Go out there and seek the truth, my friends. Subscribe to undergroundusa.com today.
Before we go, a few quick words on just who was pulling the strings during the 4 years of the Biden administration. We all know that for the overwhelming majority of the time, the holdover Obama 2.0 contingent was executing its will. But now comes word about the waning days of the administration, the fourth quarter, that can only be described as chilling. As reported by PJ Media, according to Lindy Lee, a former DNC insider, fundraiser, and confidant of the Bidens, Joe Biden, already staggering from public scrutiny, effectively lost control of the White House after that fateful debate. The event reportedly prompted an audacious power shuffle at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, one spearheaded by none other than Hunter Biden. The full story is available over at PJ Media, and I urge you to go read it. It's insane. The scandals just keep on coming. But now the question is this. Since Hunter Biden's preemptive pardon only covered a particular date set, will his actions in meetings where classified and top-secret information was discussed be actionable? He didn't have top-secret clearance. He didn't even have clearance for classified information. Which brings me to this. Those complaining about Elon Musk's influence in the Oval Office today might want to just zip it, given the puppet mastery of Joe Biden during his tenure, and especially because of who those puppet masters were during the final days.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Wokeism is a threat to the very foundations of our great nation and to the very principles of liberty and justice. The goal of wokeism is to divide us, pitting Americans against one another based on race, gender, and identity. This ideology undermines free speech and open dialogue, which are the bedrock of our republic. It promotes censorship and cancels anyone who dares to challenge its extreme agenda. We must stand against this cultural Marxism and protect our constitutional rights. Say no to wokeism.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. It brings every new podcast and article directly into your email inbox. And please remember to talk politics, current events, and religion with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. When we have those conversations, we realize we have more in common than we do in difference, and that frustrates the balkanizers of the deep state because we deny them the ability to cobble together 51% during any given election. That's how we take power back from the bureaucracy. You're listening to Underground USA. No fear, no political correctness, and no wokeism. My name is Frank Salvato.